You mentioned the hot water of the pool that we're both tipping a toe in. Do you think Wikipedia has a left-leaning political bias, which is something it is sometimes accused of?
Yeah, so I don't think so, not broadly. And, I think you can always point to specific entries and talk about specific biases, but that's part of the process of Wikipedia. Anyone can come and challenge and to go on about that. But, I see fairly often on Twitter, some sort of quite extreme accusations of bias. And I think, actually, I don't see it. I don't buy that. And if you ask people for an example, they normally struggle. And depending on who they are and what it's about. So it's certainly true that some people who have quite fringe viewpoints, um, and who knows, the full rush of history in 500 years, they might be considered to be path-breaking geniuses, but at the moment, quite fringe views, and they're just unhappy that Wikipedia doesn't report on their fringe views as being mainstream. And that, by the way, goes across all kinds of fields. I mean, I was once accosted on the street outside the TED conference in Vancouver by a guy who was a homeopath who was very upset that Wikipedia's entry on homeopathy basically says it's pseudoscience. And he felt that was biased. And I said, well, I can't really help you because, we cite good quality sources to talk about the scientific status, and it's not very good. So, it depends. And, I think it's something that we should always be vigilant about. But it's, in general, I think we're pretty good. And I think any time you go to any serious uh, political controversy, we should have a pretty balanced perspective on who's saying what the views are, and so forth. I would actually argue that the areas where we are more likely to have bias that persists for a long period of time are actually fairly obscure things, or maybe fairly non-political things. So I always give, it's kind of a humorous example, but it's meaningful. If you read our entries about Japanese anime,
Hmm.
they tend to be very, very positive and very favorable because almost no one knows about Japanese anime except for fans. And so the people who come and spend their days writing Japanese anime articles, they love it. They kind of have an inherent love for the whole area. Now, they'll, of course, being human beings, they'll have their internal debates and disputes about what's better or not, But in general, they're quite positive because nobody actually cares. On anything that people are quite passionate about, then hopefully, there's like quite a lot of interesting stuff. So I'll give an example, a contemporary example where I think we've done a good job as of my most recent sort of look at it. And that is the question about the efficacy of masks during the COVID pandemic.
Hmm.
And that's an area where I would say the public authorities really kind of jerked us all around a bit. In the very first days, they said, whatever you do, don't rush out and buy masks. And their concern was shortages in hospitals. Okay, but fair enough. Later, it's like, no, everybody's got to wear a mask everywhere. It really works really well, and Then now, I think the evidence is mixed, right? Masks seem to help. In my personal view, masks seem to help. They're no huge burden. You might as well wear a mask in any environment where you're with a giant crowd of people and so forth. But it's very politicized, that one.
Hmm.
And it's very politicized where certainly in the US, much more so. I mean, I live in the UK, I live in London. I've never seen kind of on the streets sort of the kind of thing that there's a lot of reports of people actively angry because someone else is wearing a mask, that sort of thing in public. And so, because it became very politicized, then clearly, if Wikipedia, no, so anyway, if you go to Wikipedia and you research this topic, I think you'll find more or less what I've just said. Like, actually, after it's all, to this point in history, it's mixed evidence. Like, masks seem to help, but maybe not as much as some of the authorities said, and here we are. And that's kind of an example where I think, okay, we've done a good job, but I suspect there are people on both sides of that very emotional debate who think this is ridiculous. Hopefully, we've got quality sources. So then hopefully those people who read this can say, oh, actually, it is complicated. If you can get to the point of saying, okay, I have my view, but I understand other views, and I do think it's a complicated question. Great, now we're a little bit more mature as a society.
Well, that one is an interesting one because I hope that that article also contains the meta conversation about the politicization of that topic.
Yeah,
To me, it's almost more interesting than whether masks work or not, at
for
least at
sure.
this point. Is like why it became masks became a symbol of the oppression of a centralized government. If you wear them,
Hmm.
you're a sheep that follows the mass control, the mass hysteria of an authoritarian regime. And if you don't wear a mask, then you're a science denier, anti-vaxxer, a alt-right, probably a Nazi.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And that whole politicization of society is just so damaging. And I don't know in the broader world, like how do we start to fix that? That's a really hard question.
well, at every moment, because you mentioned mainstream and fringe, there seems to be a tension here, and I wonder what your philosophy is on it. Because there's mainstream ideas and there's fringe ideas. You look at lab leak theory for this virus. There could be other things we can discuss where there's a mainstream narrative. Well, if you just look at the percent of the population or the population with platforms, what they say, and then what is a small percentage
Mm,
in opposition to that, and what is Wikipedia's responsibility to accurately represent both the mainstream and the
yeah.
fringe? Do you think?
Well, I mean, I think we have to try to do our best to recognize both, but also to appropriately contextualize. And so this can be quite hard, particularly when emotions are high. That's just a fact about human beings. Um, I'll give a simpler example because there's not a lot of emotion around it. Like our entry on the moon doesn't say, some say the moon's made of rocks, some say cheese. You know, who knows? That kind of false neutrality is not what we want to get to. Like
Mhm.
that doesn't make any sense. But that one's easy. Like we all understand. I think there is a Wikipedia entry called something like "The moon is made of cheese,"
Mhm.
where it talks about this is a common sort of joke or thing that children say or that people tell to children or whatever. You know, it's just a thing. Everybody's heard moon's made of cheese, but nobody thinks, wow, like Wikipedia is so one-sided, it doesn't even acknowledge the cheese theory. I say the same thing about flat Earth. You know, again,
That's exactly what I'm looking up right now.
very little controversy. We will have an entry about flat Earth theorizing, flat
Mhm.
Earth people. My personal view is most of the people who claim to be flat earthers are just having a laugh, trolling, and more power to them. Have some fun, but let's not be, ridiculous. But
Of
then,
course, for most of human history, people believe that the Earth is flat. So the article I'm looking at is actually kind of focusing on this history. Flat Earth is an archaic and scientifically disproven conception of the Earth's shape as a plane or disk. Many ancient cultures subscribe to a flat Earth cosmography with pretty cool pictures of what a flat Earth would look like. With dragon, is that dragon? No, angels on the edge. There's a lot of controversy about that. What is on the edge? Is it the wall? Is it angels? Is it
yeah, yeah.
dragons? Is there a
And
dome?
and how can you fly from
What's
South Africa to Perth? Because on a flat Earth view, that's really too far for any plane to make it.
what I want to know?
It's all spread out.
What I want to know is what's on the other side, Jimmy. What's on the other side? That's what all of us want to know.
Yeah.
Um, so there's some. I presume there's probably a small section about the conspiracy theory of flat Earth, because I think there's a sizable percent of the population who at least will say they believe in a flat Earth.
Yeah.
I think it is a movement that just says that the mainstream narrative, to have distrust and skepticism about the mainstream narrative, which to a very small
Mm.
degree is probably a very productive thing to do. It's part of the scientific process, but you can get a little silly and ridiculous with it.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, yeah, it's exactly right. And so, I think I find on many, many cases, and of course I, like anybody else, might quibble about this or that in any Wikipedia article. But in general, I think there is a pretty good sort of willingness and indeed eagerness to say, oh, let's fairly represent all of the meaningfully important sides. So there's still a lot to unpack in that, right? So meaningfully important. So, people who um, are raising questions about the efficacy of masks. Okay, that's actually a reasonable thing to have a discussion about, and hopefully we should treat that as a fair conversation to have, and actually address which authorities have said what, and so on and so forth. Um, and then there are other cases where it's not meaningful opposition. Like you just wouldn't say if I mean I doubt if the main article Moon it may mention cheese, but probably not even
Mhm.
because it's not credible and it's not even meant to be serious by anyone. Or the article on the Earth certainly won't have a paragraph that says, well, most scientists think it's round, but certain people think flat. Like that's just a silly thing to put in that article. You would want to sort of address, that's an interesting cultural phenomenon.
Mhm.
You want to put it somewhere. Um, so this goes into all kinds of things about politics. You want to be really careful, really thoughtful about not getting caught up in the anger of our times, and really recognize. So I always thought, I remember being really kind of proud of the U.S. at the time when it was McCain was running against Obama,
Mhm.
because I thought, I've got plenty of disagreements with both of them, but they both seem like thoughtful and interesting people who I would have different disagreements with. But I always felt like, yeah, like that's good. Now we can have a debate. Now we can have an interesting debate, and it isn't just sort of people slamming each other, personal attacks, and so forth.
And you're saying Wikipedia also represented that?
I hope so. Yeah, and I think so in the main. Obviously, you can always find debate that went horribly wrong because there's humans involved.
But speaking of those humans, I would venture to guess. I don't know the data. Maybe you can let me know. But the personal political leaning of the group of people who edit Wikipedia probably leans left, I would guess. So to me, the question there is, I mean, the same is true for Silicon Valley. The task for Silicon Valley is to create platforms that are not politically biased,
Right.
even though there is a bias for the engineers who create it. And I believe it's possible to do that. There's kind of conspiracy theories that it somehow is impossible, and there's this whole conspiracy where the left is controlling it, and so on. I think engineers, for the most part, want to create platforms that are open and unbiased, that create all kinds of perspective, because that's super exciting to have all kinds of perspectives battle it out. But
Yeah.
still, is there a degree to which the personal political bias of the editors might seep in silly ways and in big ways? Silly ways could be, I think, hopefully I'm correct in saying this, but the right will call it the Democrat Party, and the left will call it the Democratic Party, right?
Yeah.
Like subtle.
So,
Like it always
yeah.
hits my ear weird. Like, are we children here? That we're like we're literally taking words and like just jabbing at each other. Like, yeah, I could like capitalize a thing in a certain way, or I can like just take a word and mess with them. And that's a small way of how you use words, but you can also have a bigger way about beliefs, about various perspectives on political events, on Hunter Biden's laptop, on how big of a story that is or not, how big the censorship of that story is or not, that kind of. And then there's these camps that take very strong points and they construct big narratives around that. And it's a very sizable percent of the population believes the two narratives that compete with each other.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting, and it feels, but it's hard to judge. The sweep of history within your own lifetime.
Sure. Yeah.
But it feels like it's gotten much worse.
Yes.
That this idea of
Yes.
two parallel universes, where people can't even agree on certain basic facts, feels worse than it used to be. And I'm not sure if that's true or if it just feels that way, but I also am not sure what the causes are. I think I would lay a lot of the blame in recent years on social media algorithms, which reward clickbait headlines, which reward tweets that go viral, and they go viral because they're cute and clever. I mean, my most successful tweet ever by a fairly wide margin. Some reporter tweeted at Elon Musk because he was complaining about Wikipedia or something. You should buy Wikipedia, and I just wrote "not for sale,"
Nice.
and 90 zillion retweets, and people liked it, and it was all very good. But I'm like, you know what? It's a cute line, right? And it's a good like mic drop and all that. And I was pleased with myself. I'm like, it's not really discourse, right? It's not really sort of what I like to do, but it's what social media really rewards, which is kind of lets you and him have a fight, right? And that's more interesting. I mean, it's funny because at the time I was texting with Elon, who was very pleasant to me, and all of that. And it's
So
like,
he might have been a little bit shitty. The reporter might have been a little bit shitty, but you fed into the shitty with a snarky, funny response. Not for sale.
Yeah.
And like, where do you, like, what? So that's a funny little exchange, and you could probably after that laugh it off, and it's fun. But like that kind of mechanism that rewards the snark, it can go into viciousness.
Yeah. Well, and we certainly see it online. You know, I like a series of tweets. You know, sort of a tweet thread of 15 tweets that assesses the quality of the evidence for masks, pros and cons, and sort of where this. That's not going to go viral, you know. But you know, a smackdown for a famous politician who is famously in favor of masks, who also went to a dinner and didn't wear a mask, that's going to go viral. And, you know, that's partly human nature. You know, people love to call out hypocrisy and all of that, but it's partly what these systems elevate automatically. I talk about this with respect to Facebook, for example. So I think Facebook has done a pretty good job, although it's taken longer than it should in some cases. But, you know, if you have a very large following and you're really spouting hatred or misinformation, disinformation, they've kicked people off. They've done, you know, some reasonable things there. But actually the deeper issue is of this the anger we're talking about, of the contentiousness of everything. I make a family example with two great stereotypes. So one, the crackpot racist uncle, and one, the sweet grandma. And I always want to point out all of my uncles in my family were wonderful people. So I didn't have a crackpot racist, but everybody knows the stereotype. Yes. Well, so grandma, she just posts like sweet comments on the kids' pictures and congratulates people on their wedding anniversary. And crackpot uncle's posting his nonsense. And normally, it's sort of at Christmas dinner, everybody rolls their eyes. Oh yeah, Uncle Frank's here. He's probably going to say some racist comment, and we're going to tell him to shut up, or you know, maybe let's not invite him this year. You know, the normal human drama. He's got his three mates down at the pub who listen to him and all of that. But now, Grandma's got 54 followers on Facebook, which is the intimate family, and racist uncle has 714. So he's not a massive influencer or whatever, but how did that happen? It's because the algorithm notices, oh, when she posts, nothing happens. He posts, and then everybody jumps in to go, God, shut up, Uncle Frank, like that's outrageous. And it's like, oh, there's engagement, there's page views, there's ads, right? And those algorithms, I think they're working to improve that, but it's really hard for them. It's hard to improve that if that actually is working. If the people who are saying things that get engagement, if it's not too awful, but it's just, like maybe it's not a racist uncle, but maybe it's an uncle who posts a lot about what an idiot Biden is, right? Which isn't necessarily an offensive or blockable or bannable thing, and it shouldn't be. But if that's the discourse that gets elevated because it gets a rise out of people, then suddenly in a society, it's like, oh, we get more of what we reward. So I think that's a piece of what's gone on.